welcome to the Badass Breastfeeding Podcast. This is Dianne, your lactation consultant.
And I'm Abby, the Badass Breastfeeder. And you are welcome to visit our website, badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com, and check out all of our pages, especially our sponsor page, because sponsors make this podcast possible. And scroll down while you're there and enter your email address, and we'll send episodes straight to your inbox every week. And also over at badassbreastfeedingpodcast.com, you can find information about scheduling your very own one-on-one online lactation consultation with Dianne. And we are on Patreon, and you can visit the link at the top of the show notes, wherever you're listening from, and check out a tier there to see if any of them work for you. And join us over there. It's a way to support the podcast and to get to know a nice community of people who are there to support and offer advice and listen while you vent. And we are still hosting our ongoing giveaway for people who leave reviews around the internet, whether it's written reviews or stars or whatever you can. Leave a review, take a screenshot, send it over to badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll send you a goodie bag of podcast stickers and thank you for nursing in public cards. And if you haven't received yours and you feel like you should have received yours, then please send an email to badassbreastfeedingpodcast@gmail.com and make sure that we sent it. And that's fine. Check my work.
Yes.
And also, if you send emails and you don't get immediate responses, don't worry. You will get a response.
We do respond to everybody. It just takes some time.
Yeah. Sometimes that takes a minute. But yeah, now Dianne has our review of the week.
It says, I found this podcast when my baby boy was 6 months and we were struggling with bottle refusal. After listening to one episode, I was hooked and have continued to listen any chance I get. I wish I found this podcast sooner while I was in the trenches of new motherhood. I relate so much to these ladies and feel supported in my breastfeeding journey. I recommend this podcast to any new mom looking to breastfeed. We are currently 12 months in and going strong. Well, congratulations to you. 12 months is a big milestone. Well, that's amazing.
Yes. Happy nurseversary.
Yeah. That's a mouthful.
I know.
The whole bottle refusal thing. Now I'm curious to know, like, did she get her baby boy to take a bottle? I wish we knew that if she got him to take a bottle. I saw somebody this week because of bottle refusal. Oh, it can sometimes happen.
It's so stressful.
It's so stressful. So stressful. Poor little guy didn't want to take a bottle. Poor mom. Poor everybody. Dad was the babysitter. Not the babysitter, but you know what I mean. So
the daytime caregiver, yeah.
Yeah, Dad's a daytime caregiver. So he was like stressing out that the baby wouldn't take a bottle either. And, you know, the whole thing. So we get it. I see it all the time. And I hope you found some help because I know we've got episodes on it. And I hope that you found some help with that and that your baby boy ended up taking a bottle for you. But thank you for leaving that for us. We appreciate it.
Yeah. And today we're going to talk about weight gain.
Weight gain for the baby.
Not you.
Not you.
Which is what I thought. Dianne said, well, let's talk about weight gain. And I said, can we talk about 30 minutes? Can we talk 30 minutes about gaining weight? And then I don't remember what you said, but I was like, oh, the baby. Of course.
I was like, oh, wait, for the baby. And it's been a while. Like I know, I know not for us because I can talk about how much I've gained, but nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah,
yeah. Nobody wants to hear about my weight gain problems. The reason why I wanted to talk about this again, now I know we've talked about it in the past, but it's been a little while. But I just saw a baby a couple of weeks ago, and this baby, she contacted me because she wanted to be sure that the baby was transferring enough milk. And you know, Mom was very educated in a lot of the breastfeeding stuff. And she just wanted to make sure that the baby was getting what she needed because the weight gain was slow. And I saw them, and this baby is perfect. I mean, she's just this beautiful little girl. She had these big, full cheeks. She was alert. She was just perfect and did fine at the breast, did really well. mom had just had a tongue and lip revision. So maybe she was transferring a little bit slowly prior to, and now she was starting to kind of kick it into gear a little bit more. I don't know, what had happened before I saw them, but did very well, did fine. But the pediatrician had told mom that the baby was almost failure to thrive.
Oh.
And I was like, are you kidding me? This is not a failure to thrive baby. She was perfect. And
Ugh.
mom wasn't huge, she wasn't a real big person. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I go, she wasn't losing weight. She was just gaining a little bit slower. But of course, and the mom was like, well, I know, but that got in my head. And I'm like, well, of course it's going to get in your head. It was crazy. So I wanted to definitely talk about it and talk about like what's normal and what's not normal and failure to thrive. That's a pretty strong statement to throw out there about a baby.
I know. And I feel like they throw it around a little bit.
It's almost like a threat.
Oh,
your baby is almost failure to thrive.
Yeah. And it's like, use formula or this is what we're going to call your baby.
Oh my gosh. I know. So in every baby, so the thing with breastfeeding is that babies gain the way they're supposed to gain. And because it's natural for their body, it's natural for their genetic makeup. So they gain the way they're supposed to gain. And some babies will gain a little bit slower, and that's not abnormal. We just have to look at what the situation is. We have to look at all the things. But what is normal? So you have a baby, you're in the hospital or home, wherever you happen to have your baby. But in the first couple of days of your baby's life, they always lose a little bit of weight. They always do. It's normal. Yeah. It's expected. And I know people sometimes get a little panicked about that. Well, the baby was losing weight in the hospital or the baby was losing weight. Normal. And we expect that to happen. And they expect the baby to get to around, or they don't like I'm not going to say they expect the baby to get to around, but the cutoff for that weight loss is usually about 10% of their birth weight. That's usually like where they start to feel a little uncomfortable, as if the baby got to 10%. And that is, that is pretty generalized around the board, is that 10% mark. We don't want the baby to get to 10% because we want them to obviously start to regain back their birth weight. But there's situations that can sometimes cause the baby to lose more weight. And that could be like what happened during labor. Did you receive lots of fluid during labor? That is going to cause the baby's birth weight to escalate a little bit. And then they're going to lose more weight faster. So that's going to look like they dropped more weight. But that's one of the biggest reasons why babies end up being supplemented in the hospital, because they're like, oh my gosh, the baby lost too much weight. We have to supplement them. But a lot of it was that their birth weight wasn't accurate to begin with. And now they're losing a little bit more of water weight. Very, very normal. Happens all the time. We see it happen all the time. So your baby, even though they're eating colostrum, we know they're nursing, they're getting the colostrum. That's all they need when they're in their first couple of days of life. They don't need anything else other than that. But they're not going to gain weight on colostrum. And babies do not start to regain their birth weight until your milk comes in. So usually right around that 3-day mark, 3-ish days, when your milk is starting to turn over from colostrum to mature milk, that is when your baby's going to start to gain weight. So a lot of times you go to the pediatrician before that, and the pediatrician's like, oh, your baby's still down. Your baby's going to still be down because they're not gaining weight off colostrum. They're going to be down until your milk comes in and they're feeding off of the milk supply. But this is the normal process. It's just the normal process of how things
it's like they don't even know.
Right. They don't know. This is a whole, they're just like, oh no, the baby needs to, you got to start supplementing. Or in fact, I just saw a mom the other day where they did suggest, almost kind of like hinting, maybe you should start supplementing. And the mom was like, well, my milk is just starting to come in. And I'm like, that's the perfect thing to say, because if your milk is starting to come in, then like, let's give it a minute, let's give it a chance for things to work. We're not even like letting it work. We're just automatically jumping to supplementing.
Yes, I know. This baby just got here and now we're going to just panic.
Everybody panics.
Yeah. I mean, they're not going to die in a day. Like, I mean, I know that's an extreme thing to say, but it's like, calm down.
Mm-hmm.
Let's like figure things out. Let's work through the problems. We're just immediately like, oh my God, you're not gaining weight. Oh my God, call DCFS. Oh my God.
It is just, it's a lot of panicking, but it makes you as a parent, of a brand new baby, that's the last thing you want to hear.
Yeah.
It makes you freak out with good reason. I mean, it's just, it's not. And I remember like when my twins were born, my son lost a little bit more weight. I think he was down around 10%. And they wanted to keep him in the hospital. And I was like, no.
Oh my God.
I'm not taking one twin home. Like, this is ridiculous. I'm not taking one baby home.
Ugh.
So they sent a nurse over like every day to weigh him, or I don't know, a couple times a week or something like that, to make sure he was gaining weight. And then I remember like she was kind of rude to my son, who was only 2 at the time. Like, I remember this pretty clearly.
Ew.
And she was really she was kind of rude to him because he wanted to touch the scale because, he was interested, obviously. I mean, I run into this all the time when I do home visits. And there's and he's 2. Yeah. And she was rude. And my sister was like, tell her not to come anymore. Just, you're done with that. So that's kind of what we did. But it was unnecessary. He was fine. He was absolutely fine. We just needed my milk to come in and for him to eat. And that's
all right.
Anyway, so as the baby grows, now we kind of expect the babies to, when they're breastfeeding, to gain like 1/2 ounce to 1 ounce a day. That's pretty much expected. Some pediatricians like the babies more at the ounce a day. Most babies are around 1 ounce a day, but some babies do gain a little bit slower, and that's okay. That might just be their genetic makeup, that they just gain a little bit slower. Are they still growing? Is their head circumference still growing? Is their length still growing? Are they pooping and peeing the way they're supposed to be? Are they meeting milestones? Those things are all very, very important things to look at when we're looking at what is going on with the weight gain. So if your baby is gaining slower, I would definitely suggest to see a lactation consultant just to verify that your baby's transferring milk well and there is no problem with the feeds, because that could be, all that we need to do. Or like Abby said, sometimes you just need to tweak things. Sometimes we just need to, because I've had people be like, well, the baby sleeps longer and I just let him sleep when we're missing a feeding where we could get another feeding in. So, and I know nobody likes to wake up their baby, but if we want to put a little bit more weight on them, sometimes we need to wake them up and sneak another feeding in, or do a dream feed where you just kind of like scoop them up while they're sleeping and get a feeding in. Or maybe you're only feeding on one breast and we need to feed on both breasts. Like there's just little things that we can do if the weight gain is a little bit slower than expected. But it doesn't mean you automatically have to go to supplementing. If your baby is, transferring milk well and they're just gaining a little bit slower, there shouldn't be a problem. I mean, it should be okay.
You see this too. We think about babies as being like all just one thing, and they're supposed to be meeting all these numbers that are all exactly the same across the board. But you look at like kids who are, right around that like pre-teen age, and you can have a 12-year-old that is 80 pounds and really small. And then a 12-year-old that's like 6 feet tall and 140 pounds. Mm-hmm. Like, I mean, we stand around our group of friends and we'll be like, look at these two. They're the same age. And they look like,
right.
They look like different generations of people. Like everyone just grows differently and hits those milestones differently. It doesn't change throughout your entire life.
That's a great example.
Adults aren't the same size.
Right, exactly. And we just kind of expect that babies are, and people are like, well, their baby is at the, the 10th percentile. Well, is that where they've been? Like, have they been on the 10th percentile? Because if that's where they've been, that's fine. If that's where the way they're growing and they're staying consistent on their own curve, then that's fine. We don't expect them to go from the 10th percentile to the 50th because that doesn't make any sense. That's not where they are. They are at the 10th percentile. And all that means is that 90% of the babies are heavier than they are, I believe, right? When you have a baby at the 10th percentile.
These yes, and the percentiles are like so insane anyway. We did an episode about that on how all these percentiles came to be, and it's insanely ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
Those are not things to be listening to. But also, if you don't have people say like, oh, they're in the 10th percentile, they're too small. You have to have babies everywhere, otherwise there is no percentile. Like,
right?
It's just the range. The range of weight for babies that age. It's not where they're supposed to be. Every baby's supposed to be in the 90th percentile. Well, that doesn't make any sense because then there wouldn't be a 90th percentile. That's not how percentiles work.
Right. And you have to look at what your family looks like as well. If you're a little bit smaller and your partner is smaller, how are you going to expect this baby to be huge? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Or if you're really tall and your partner's really tall, expect to have a tall baby or a longer baby. That's just what is going to happen. But I feel like these babies, like everybody gets so worried about them and then they turn one and then people are like, oh, this is just how they are, I guess. Well, then why did we worry about them for the whole first year of their life? It's just crazy. So we need to look, like I said, we need to look at all the things.
We go crazy about having fat babies. Like, we have to have a fat baby, the fat baby. And then as soon as you enter childhood, then you're too fat. And then we have to, it's like, it doesn't make any sense. And people grow up all fucked up.
It really is kind of a mess. It really is.
It is.
That people are like looking for these fat babies. And I know a lot of that it can be cultural. And it looks like, oh, if your baby's fat, then they're healthy. But then they get to be a year and it's just, and I see that too. Like, people will be like, my cousin had a baby a couple of months after I had a baby, and you put them next to each other and that baby is super big and my baby isn't. And what's going on? I just don't, why is my baby not bigger than this? And it's like, because it's just not meant to be sometimes.
Yeah.
If they're eating and they're gaining weight, even if it's half an ounce to an ounce a day, instead of like 2 ounces a day, half an ounce to an ounce a day is what we expect to see. And that's only for the first few months. As they get older, if they get past 6 months, that weight gain is going to slow down too. And they're not gaining weight at that level anymore. The big weight gain piece is in the very beginning. But I've also seen some babies who grew in length more in the first couple of months and then started to put their pounds on. So it really just depends on what your baby is going to do and what their genetic makeup is. And when they're breastfeeding, their body grows the way it's supposed to grow. So as long as they're, like I said, as long as they're kind of staying on that curve, which is ridiculous, but that's what everybody looks at, those percentiles and those curves. If your baby has been at the 30th percentile, and that's where they've been for the last 3 months, and then all of a sudden you go to a doctor's appointment and you haven't been there in 2 months and they weigh your baby and your baby's at the 10th percentile, like, that's going to be a problem. because they dropped quite a bit. And that's not something that you want to see. You want to see them at the same curve that they have been on. Regardless of what that curve is, that's where we want to see that baby. And I have a baby right now that I've been working with for a while who has been at the bouncing between the 1 and 2 percentage. And the mom is small and the dad is small and the baby looks great, but not gaining very well, just not gaining the way everybody expects them to. And he's long, but they're like, oh no, he didn't gain enough weight. I'm like, he's on his curve though. It's just a low curve, but that's where he's on his curve. I mean, and when we look at things like that baby I was talking about in the beginning, she has actually doubled her birth weight and they're still not happy about it. And it's like, that baby's doubled her birth weight already because she was born really little. And she doubled her birth weight and they're still like, oh, it's not good enough. And that is really a lot to put on a parent, because then the parents, it's just like that mom had said to me, like, it gets in your head. And then you're like, oh my gosh, what's wrong with, I'm not doing a good enough job. Like, nobody wants to be feeding a baby constantly. And this is kind of what I talked about with her when she was in my office. Like, it's so discouraging and defeating to be breastfeeding this baby where it feels like that's all you're doing. It's feeding every 20 minutes, right? Like, and then you go to the pediatrician and they say, well, the baby didn't gain enough weight. Like, it's so discouraging to hear that.
You're like, the baby literally can't eat anymore. But they're not gaining. All they do is eat, but they're not gaining as much as you want them to gain. Like, that doesn't make sense.
It doesn't. So the first thing to do is to see a lactation consultant, because we want to verify, like, is the baby transferring milk? Is that happening? And if the baby is transferring milk, then you can take that back to your pediatrician and be like, the baby is moving milk. And this is just the way they're growing. Or they can do other tests just to make sure, like, is there any other issues? But usually they're just like, okay, if the baby's moving milk, the baby's transferring milk, the baby's pooping and peeing, you've seen a lactation consultant a lot of times, then they'll be kind of like satisfied with that. But if you have other kids too, how did they grow? And I've seen this happen a lot of times too. You have a baby who grew like a little bit slower, gained a little bit slower. And then you have another baby and that baby's gaining a little bit slower. And it's like, okay, now we have a trend, right? Like, now we know, like, it happened with your other baby. It's happening with this baby. Like, that's normal for your babies. It's really, it can be very, just very overwhelming to hear that your baby isn't gaining enough weight. We want to make sure that they're pooping and peeing. That is really the bottom line. And if we have a baby that's pooping and peeing the way they're supposed to be, then that's telling us they're getting the food that they need to eat. And like I said, as long as they're meeting milestones, then that is,
so
that's all we need.
So they're going to be, if you come across a problem where your baby isn't gaining weight the way that everyone is expecting them to, then you're first going to check to see if the baby's like getting the milk, which is the lactation consultant might do, check the latch, do like a weighed feed. And if that's happening, then it's kind of like, well, you got to drop it. Because the baby's eating, they're getting all the food, right? I mean, like, then this is just how this baby is.
Right. Yeah. Failure to thrive is when they're not growing at all. Like, that's failure to thrive. You have a baby that's not growing at all. They've dropped several percentiles. They're not growing at all. Their length isn't growing. Their head circumference isn't growing. Their weight's not going on. Like, that is what a failure to thrive type of situation. Not a baby that's gaining slowly. or a baby that's still growing in length and still growing in head circumference, but just gaining slowly. Like that is not a failure to thrive baby. So you have to kind of, what I really want everybody to do is look at all the things. We have to look at all the things. We can't just go, oh, look at the weight. Yeah, that's not right. Because like Abby said, everybody's different sizes.
Yeah.
Everybody is. And your kids are going to be like different sizes, even sometimes in the same family as they go, as they start to grow.
My kids are, Jack is 13 and Exley is 10. And Exley is 130 pounds and Jack is 90 pounds.
Yeah.
They're
different.
Exley gives clothes to Jack. That's how the transfer of clothes go in the house. Not from the oldest to the youngest, from the biggest to the smallest.
Yeah, and one of my sisters is like 5'2", and I'm 5'10".
Yeah.
Like we're different. We're different. And I can guarantee you that when we were babies, it was different. Some families run the same. Yeah. Like I said, you might see that their babies are 3 babies in a row all gained slow. You might see that. And then you might have it where it's just like this, where it's like, even in the same family, it's just different. Because not everybody should not be the same. It's just not going to happen that way.
Yeah.
So we have to look at like what is going on with your genetic makeup with your baby and what they're going to be like. They're going to grow the way they're supposed to grow when they're on breast milk. That's just the bottom line. When they're on formula, they tend to gain weight faster.
But that doesn't mean that you need to go get formula so that they gain weight faster.
No.
Because that's just not
how it does not. Yeah, for sure.
Well, send us your stories. I would love to hear. Well, people send emails and they're like, "Here's, this is what we went through, and here's a picture of us now." I love that because I can share it on social media.
Oh,
and do a little ad for the podcast or whatever. So send us your stories, and other people, like, so many people are going through these things and they think that they're alone, or they think that or they're being bullied by their pediatrician or something. So just tell us your stories about weight gain or anything else.
Yeah.
And we can share those stories with people.
Yeah, absolutely. And if this like hit a trigger for you because you've been through it, then definitely let us know. Tell us about it. We want to hear it. That's it.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.